The fog hung heavy over the Bay Area, cloaking the city in an eerie silence. The streets stretched endlessly under dim streetlights, casting long, distorted shadows. The killer moved with calculated precision, his breath barely audible as he watched from a distance. He had been planning this night for weeks, his every move was choreographed to perfection. He was not a man, he was an idea, a shadow, a cipher hidden within layers of his own madness. Detective Elias Monroe sat at his cluttered desk in the San Francisco Police Department, staring at the letter in front of him. The words were written in a meticulous scrawl, almost artistic in their symmetry. The cipher was dense, a grid of symbols and shapes that seemed to taunt him. It was the Zodiac Killer's third letter, and it came with another body. The victim was found near Lake Berryessa, bound and lifeless, a symbol etched into the ground beside her. Elias rubbed his temples, exhaustion weighing on him. He was 45, with graying hair and deep lines carved into his face. Years of chasing shadows had left him with a permanent scowl and a relentless need for answers. Across from him, journalist Clara Hayes leaned forward, her notebook open. She was 32, with sharp features and a determination that matched his own. Clara had been following the Zodiac's case from the start, her articles delving into the psychology of a killer who thrived on chaos. "He's playing with us," Clara said, her voice steady but tinged with frustration. "Every letter, every cipher is just another layer of his game. But he's leaving breadcrumbs." Elias nodded, his eyes never leaving the letter. "Breadcrumbs for what? A trail to nowhere? Or is it just to mock us?" The phone on his desk buzzed, breaking the tense silence. Elias picked it up, his expression darkening as he listened. Another body had been found, this time in the city, in a quiet alley near Fisherman's Wharf. The victim, a young man in his 20s, had been stabbed multiple times. A piece of the cipher was found in his pocket, folded neatly as if it were a note to a friend. The crime scene was a mosaic of blood and chaos. The alley was narrow, lit only by a flickering street lamp that cast grotesque shadows on the walls. Elias stood over the body, his jaw clenched. Clara hovered nearby, her eyes scanning the scene with the precision of someone who had seen too much but could never look away. "Look at this," Elias said, crouching beside the victim. He pointed to the symbol drawn in blood on the ground, a circle with a cross through it. "The Zodiac's calling card." Clara's breath hitched. "He's escalating. This is different. It's more deliberate." Elias's gaze hardened. "He's daring us to find him." Days turned into nights as Elias and Clara worked tirelessly, following every lead and decoding every letter. The Zodiac's words were both a challenge and a taunt, laced with riddles and references that seemed to point in every direction at once. Each cipher was a labyrinth, and each clue brought them closer to the edge of their sanity. One night, as Clara sifted through stacks of evidence in her apartment, her eyes caught something she had overlooked before. A symbol on one of the Zodiac's letters matched a marking on an old, unsolved case from a decade earlier. Heart pounding, she called Elias. "It's connected," she said, her voice trembling. "He's been doing this longer than we thought." Elias arrived within the hour, his eyes scanning the evidence Clara had laid out. Together, they pieced together a timeline that stretched back years, linking the Zodiac to murders long thought unrelated. The realization was chilling, this wasn't just a killer. This was a ghost that had haunted the city for decades. The hunt for the Zodiac was no longer just a case. It was an obsession, a descent into a world where every shadow hid a secret and every clue was a trap. As Elias and Clara delved deeper, they discovered something that hadn't been revealed to the public, a list of names the Zodiac had written in one of his ciphers. Most of the names were victims, but one stood out, Victoria Wells, a woman who had vanished 2 decades earlier but had never been linked to the killer. Elias tracked down Victoria's sister, Evelyn Wells, now in her late 50s and living in a small house on the outskirts of the city. Evelyn was reluctant to talk, but the mention of her sister's name brought tears to her eyes. She handed Elias a box of Victoria's belongings, untouched since her disappearance. Inside was a diary, filled with entries about a man Victoria had been seeing shortly before she vanished. The description was vague, but one detail stood out: he had an unusual tattoo of a circle with a cross through it. The diary led Elias and Clara to an abandoned cabin in the woods, a location mentioned in one of Victoria's last entries. The cabin was decrepit, its windows shattered and its walls covered in graffiti. Inside, they found evidence of the Zodiac's presence: maps, photographs of victims, and a crude replica of his cipher symbols carved into the floorboards. As they searched the cabin, the tension grew. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and decay. Clara's flashlight flickered, casting dancing shadows across the walls. In the corner of the room, Elias found a hidden compartment beneath the floor. Inside was a collection of letters, all addressed to the police but never sent. Each one contained pieces of a puzzle, leading to a final, chilling message: "You're closer than you think." The Zodiac's game was far from over. Elias and Clara returned to the city, their minds racing. Clara suggested consulting a cryptography expert, someone outside the police force who might see the patterns they were missing. This led them to Dr. Samuel Drake, a reclusive mathematician in his 60s, known for solving impossible puzzles. Drake's cluttered study, filled with old books and chalkboards covered in equations, became their new headquarters. Drake examined the unsent letters, his sharp mind unraveling connections that had eluded Elias and Clara. "This isn't just a cipher," he said, his voice calm but firm. "It's a roadmap. He's not hiding from you. He's guiding you somewhere." Elias frowned. "Guiding us to what?" Drake hesitated, then pointed to a series of coordinates hidden within the symbols. "A meeting place, perhaps. Or a final message." The coordinates led to a remote location near Mount Diablo, where they found an old bunker hidden among the trees. The air was cold and the silence was oppressive. As they descended into the bunker, they found the walls covered in newspaper clippings, photographs of victims, and more ciphers. In the center of the room was a table with a single envelope addressed to Elias. Inside the envelope was a photograph of Elias and Clara taken from a distance. On the back, a message read, "The end is the beginning."